Great to have you back for another episode of the Redeemed Man podcast. I'm Nate Dewberry, director of the Redeemed. And this month, we're talking a lot about the power of our words. And I am thrilled today to have with us Ron Acosta. He's an entrepreneur, a leadership coach, motivational speaker, and he's dedicated to helping individuals and organizations reach their full potential. With over 2 decades of experience, Ron has become a trusted advisor to leaders across industries, offering practical strategies for growth and effective leadership. And Ron has a powerful story of God's grace. He has released a book, Unstoppable Grace, that shares so much of his story. And we'll try to unpackage some of that today. But the best thing for you to do is just go get you a copy of his book, as you won't be able to put it down as you hear his life story. Ron, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Nathan. Glad to be here this morning.
So glad to have you. I enjoyed your book thoroughly. It was really such a powerful story. You have gone through so many different things, and I really was struck by 2 quotes in the book. Toward the end of the book, I love Brennan Manning, and on page 211
Yeah.
of your book, you have one of Brennan Manning's quotes that says, "To live by grace means to acknowledge my whole life story, the light side and the dark. In admitting my shadow side, I learn who I am and what God's grace means." And I think that so encapsulates your story, encapsulates the book that you share both the light and the dark side of your life. And Ron, I just thank you for that. I honor you for that. It is not easy to share some of the difficult things we've walked through, but you do such a great job in your book. And just want to really start out by unpacking a little bit of your story. As we're talking about the power of words this month, in Proverbs it says that the death and life are in the power of the tongue. And your life is a testimony of that, of things that were spoken over you negatively and things that were spoken over you positively. Could you share a little bit about some of those things early on in your life that people spoke over you and how that really defined your life for many years?
Yeah, I think it's kind of, I went through counseling for about a year to kind of dig all this information. But, I was very young when my mom told me that I was not going to amount to anything. Um, she was relating it to my father. I think a lot of it, my father abandoned us when I was 2 years old. And he was a drug addict. He was a criminal. He did a lot of bad things. But she would always relate to me that, especially when I got in trouble, and as a little boy, I stayed in trouble, that I was going to be like him, that I was going to grow up just to be like him. And I didn't know much about him, but I knew he was a bad person. I knew he was a very bad person. So that really started in my life to get this mindset that I was going to be nothing. I was not going to amount to anything. And I think through my high school years or school years, that kind of got, um, I guess, represented based on, different teachers and things like that. I was told that, I needed to go to trade school. Couldn't go to college. And, from friends saying that I was different. I was in a town that I was the only Hispanic in the town. They didn't know what Hispanic was. And so, I mean, the racial slurs and the constant, picking and joking, and if you want to call it bullying, at that point, was just something that kind of weighed on me throughout my life. I mean, I even today, I'm not going to lie to you, even today, there's pieces when I get stressed, I go back and hear those words. Ronnie, you're not going to amount to anything. Ronnie, you're not going to be anything. And through my life, if you read the stories, every time I kind of went into a bad spell, those those memories or those words um, came back to me quite often. I had a stepdad that was really, it wasn't physically abusive, but he was very
Yeah.
verbally abusive. I mean, I remember just very young crying and, was told, uh, I'll give you something to cry about if you keep crying. Young boys don't cry. And I know that the stereotype is we're supposed to be big and strong, but that taught me a lesson too. Is that you don't share your feelings. You don't trust people with your feelings, and so that got me to a point where I was so driven to show everybody that I was going to be somebody. So some of those things, I don't want people to think, that just because what I was told, I became a victim of it. It
Yeah.
it did some positive things.
Yeah.
It drove me to show them that I was going to be somebody. I was going to show my mom that I was going to make it, and that drove me for a lot of years. That drove me through high school, drove me through college, and into my work career. Is I was going to be somebody. I was going to make something out of myself.
Yeah, that drive really allowed you to achieve a lot of success, and I think most likely, at least from what I understood in the book, is that there was the positive impact of being able to achieve great things, and yet there was still that wound and pain in your heart and soul that you had not dealt with, and that continued to ruminate in your life and come to the surface at different times in your relationship with your wife and different seasons that you were walking through depending on the stress and the things that were happening in your life. And I think that's so true with our wounds of oftentimes that if they're not dealt with when those seasons of stress and strain come, that they can come up to the surface in a very unhealthy way. And yet, like you said, a lot of the pain you walked through really allowed you to excel with a sense of determination and drive that few people could have. One of the stories that really stood out to me in your book is a moment when you're, I believe, in North Carolina, and your family basically just leaves and you're
Yeah,
there as a young man. Can you talk a little bit about that story?
yeah. So my stepdad ran from affairs. I mean, that's what his life was. I mean, every time we moved, it was because he has was running because of his infidelity. So at age 16, they decided this was a case where they had to leave and they were going to pack up and move to Florida. And I told them I was not going to leave. And to some degree, I think they were very easy and said, "Okay, we'll leave you here." It was not like, "No, you're going to come. No, we're going to make you come. No, you're our son. You need to be with us." It was, "Okay, we're going to let you stay here." And so at 16, I'm basically on my own. I mean, we they did find me a place to stay with an aunt and uncle, but there was a period that I was living life with no supervision, with nobody telling me when to get up, when to go to bed, when to eat, when not to eat. It was just you're on your own, and I grew up a lot during that period of time. It was painful. I mean, I think I look back at it, and one of the biggest challenges I deal with is abandonment. So you
Yeah.
talk about different behaviors and beliefs. One of the things that I kind of grew up with is abandon. Anybody who loved me abandoned me, and that solidified the abandonment piece of it. So they really didn't love me, so they just left me. I thought they would have fought for me. I mean, I would not let my kids do that,
Yeah.
but I thought they would have fought a little bit and say, "No, you're going to go." I'm glad they didn't, um, but yeah, I think that was a tremendous growing up piece for me. And again, at that point, I was set that I was not going to let that define who I was. I was going to be able to live up myself. I was going to make it. I was going to pay for my own way. And I did that. I did that. I mean, I had a job and I worked, and I gave up a lot. I gave up a lot. I gave up sports and I did some things like that because I got out of school at 1 o'clock and I went to work, and I worked to
Yeah.
1 to 11. And so, but that's what I felt I needed to do just to provide for myself.
Yeah, I think that work ethic definitely shows up in your success and career and how you continue to push yourself to, be able to provide for yourself in so many ways and provide for your family. When I think back to your story, you mentioned at one point, and even when you were in college, of joining a fraternity
Oh
because you
yeah,
knew you would have a place to live.
yeah.
And
It's so yeah that there was a period of time that there was a lot of loneliness. I mean, in my life, I think that I went off to college and um, I didn't know exactly what I was going to do, where I was going. Uh, and then so I did join a fraternity for a reason of a fellowship was a big thing, but also when there was breaks in the winters, I mean it's Christmas time or summer, when I wasn't going to summer school, I had some place to live,
yeah,
and so I remember spending at least two Christmases, one Thanksgiving, by myself because everybody else went home for the break, but I stayed there. But I did have a place to live. I did have a place to stay, but there was a lot of loneliness, and again, I think of the abandonment piece rose its head again. But yeah, I think that again that lesson, equipped me to be able to make it on my own, to be my own person. So
I your story, when I look back and read so much of it, you see moments too where you were acting out really what had been spoken over you by your mom of being like your father. There's a pattern, and can you talk a little bit about how you were basically living out a lot of those things that you had said about you or you believed about yourself that were false?
yeah, one of the things my counselor told me, even the things that aren't said to you, what you view and what you see, can impact your belief system. And so I just was doing what I thought was the right thing. I started drinking when I was 9 years old. 13 years old, I could drink. I was drinking a 6 pack a weekend. High school, I could have drank anybody under the table.
Yeah.
I was drinking so much. I liked the taste of beer. It was great. Started doing drugs. Started small. I started with marijuana, and then it grew to cocaine and pills and different things like that, just to, I think, take away some of my pain that I thought I had, or maybe feel good. So at the point of the time, I felt different and more alive. But I was sexually abused when I was 13, so that kind of fed my need for sex. I was very sexually active in through high school. Uh, if you want to say I got addicted to pornography back then, when you didn't have very much, you had the magazines, and that was about it. But so I was living out this ideal of, if you want to say drugs, sex, and rock and roll. That's the kind of life I was living, and I didn't see any other way. I thought that was the only way I should be living, or that's the only way I would have been accepted, because that's what I was told I was going to be.
Yeah, I think one of the moments that was honestly probably one of the more heartbreaking moments for me in reading your story was that story of an authority figure abusing you and taking advantage of you and creating really somebody that was dependent upon them in a lot of ways, and just a tragic story. But again, there was so much in your past that really were wounds where people had abandoned you or taken advantage of you. You say in your book, and this was your counselor said this to you, and he said, your challenge is overcoming beliefs you grew up with, events you witnessed, and things you were told. And your life, especially through college, was littered with stories that you had seen, things that events that happened to you, words that were spoken over you, painful things that you walked through. And yes, God used many of those things to give you a strength that a lot of people don't have, a determination, a drive, and yet those wounds were there to be unpackaged, to be walked through at a later point in time. And you have really been able to do so much of that in recent years in your life of being able to unpackage those. I would love it if you would talk a little bit about kind of how you got to the point where you were unpackaging those things. I know you came to faith in your life. There were seeds that were planted early on, but talk a little bit about how you came to a place to realize and go, "Hey, I've got to do some work on those
Yeah,
areas of my life."
yeah. Just for the book. I mean, I met Christ when I was in the first grade. Didn't I went to a Christian school, so I was introduced to Christ, and I felt His love. I used to remember singing, "Yes, Jesus loves me." I didn't really know what that was, but I remember singing it, and so I prayed every night. Now lay me down to sleep. I pray the Lord my soul. Okay, I used to pray that every night. Didn't know who I was praying to really, but I would pray that every night when I was growing up. I didn't give my life to Christ till I was 43. Didn't really was not church. I went to a church a couple times, but not to hear anything that resonated with me.
Yeah.
Um, and so I was at this when I after I gave my life to Christ, I became very active. I mean, I was on fire, still am on fire. I became associate pastor. I was working in our marriage ministry. I actually led marriage retreats that we were having at the church. And so uh, the pastor sent me to a retreat. It's called Wind Shape. It's up in Colorado. It's a 7-day retreat. And they did a survey or assessment called Taylor Johnson. And in this survey, I scored low on joy and high on performance. And that performance wasn't performing art. It was something that I was driving. Everything I did, I was going to beat you.
Yeah.
I mean, second place meant you were, first loser. I mean, it was just driven in me to be the best at everything I could because of the past, because of the things that I was told I was not going to be, or what I was in my belief system. So I'd made a decision that I was going to walk with the counselor for a year. Well, actually, I take that back. I went into this counselor office, didn't know what I was going to do, and I met with him. I sat in front of him, and he goes, and so 45-minute session, right? And I finally go, Tim, I said, you probably got other people that have bigger problems than I do. And he goes, I tell you what, Ryan, I'll see you next week. And so we started this walk of just unpeeling this onion, and I
Yeah.
didn't trust people. I didn't, and I'm ashamed to say this, and I've had to confess to my wife, I didn't even trust my wife on some things. There's things in this book that she did not know. And that was hurtful to her to have to read it and go, why didn't you ever share this with me? Because I didn't, I was
Well, all the
embarrassed.
people in your life, it
Yeah.
hurts you.
Yeah, I was embarrassed. And I thought if I did that, yeah, you're right, that she might leave me, because of those things. And so as we just kept unpeeling and unpeeling and unpeeling, uh, it just became so obvious how God's hands were involved in things. I mean, it's, you read that quote. I mean, it's just, I started opening my eyes to going, my gosh, look what God did. Where could I have been? I could have been an alcoholic. I could have been a drug addict. I could have been a sex addict. I could have been living on the streets. I could have, not achieved anything. It was just this eye-opening awareness of how God had perennial grace. And I don't know if a lot of people know what that is, right? But that's, God giving us grace when we don't even know it, right? We're not even, I wasn't even a follower of Christ then, but God's grace was being poured upon me. And I just had to follow him. I just had to follow him uh, with all my heart. And I think that's one of the things that I started doing is when I heard God say something, I said, okay, what do you want me to do?
Yeah.
When do you want me to do it? How do you want me to do it? And I just did it. And that's how the book was written. The book was written because I felt God tell me, I want you to be as transparent with people that you can be, even if it hurts you or hurts others to hear some of that stuff, information. Could it help somebody else? Could it help one person? And I think that's what the whole idea of from going from where I was to where I am today. And don't say get wrong. There's still issues I fight with. I still go backwards. Um, but that's kind of what kind of transpired, into my life. So
One thing that I want our listeners to hear in that is that you were serving as an associate pastor. I mean, you had already given your life to the Lord. You were following him. You were serving in the church, and yet there were still wounds. There were still things you're working through. And I think so many times there's this false notion that when we come to know Christ, that all this stuff is just gone. And yet the reality of it is there's this process of refining and there's a process to get to freedom. A lot of Christians never experience that. They come to know Jesus and they don't deal with their wounds. They don't deal with those strongholds, those generational patterns and sinful things that have been passed down. And what happened in your life, I think, is that a perfect picture of that. Of you knew Jesus, you were following him, you were on fire for him, and yet there were still some things in your life you had to work on and allow the Holy Spirit to refine and really needed some help processing that. You needed other believers to come alongside. You needed other people praying for you. You needed to be able to share those things. I think of the passage in James where it talks about us confessing our sins, and there's healing when we tell a brother a sister in Christ. And I think that is something that's so overlooked oftentimes and something that a lot of men especially don't experience because we allow pride or this idea that we're supposed to have it all together get in the way of us really dealing with the stuff in our life. And I think a lot of times that's what happens when we see leaders fail. A lot of those leaders have come to know the Lord. They have a genuine relationship with Him, but they've never dealt with some wounds or some hidden sin in their life. And the only way we can do it is to bring it to light. And I think one of the things that your book does such a good job of telling that story of you bringing those things to the light, you getting those things out with the help of a counselor and with the help of a community around you. And I think that's important for guys to understand that sometimes you got to take that step. You got to pick up the phone and call a counselor and say, "Hey, I need some help unpackaging this." And you were willing to do that. And you have done so much work. And I think that's evident in having a conversation with you. And even you're consistently owning and going, "Hey, I'm not quite there
Oh,
yet."
yeah.
But at the same time, God has done an amazing work in transforming and changing you. Um, I have to, and I think not only changing you, but changing your family. Another super powerful moment is kind of what God did and how He used you in the life of your dad. Can you share a little bit about that? Because I think for the guys and gals who may be listening to this, or that to me, when you read your story, is just a perfect picture of how God does immeasurably more than what we could ask or imagine.
Yeah, I think that the book was not all about my father, but a big piece of it
Yeah.
is. If you look at the cover, there's a young boy sitting on a father's shoulders, which I never had the opportunity to do, except my godly father. So that picture represents me sitting on God's shoulders, and I think that, like I told you earlier, my dad abandoned us twice when I was 2 years old and 5 years old. So I really didn't get to know him that much. When he was, and when I was 2 years old, he wasn't there very much. Like I said, he was in organized crime, so he was gone. He would go into Mexico, and we wouldn't see him for months at a time. And so, at age 13, my mother told me my father had passed away. We were going to go to California. That's where I was from, by the way, California, and uh, we were going to go see my aunt had passed away, and so we were going out there, and she told me my father had passed away. I do think to some degree it was because she thought I would run, because I was having such a hard time at home at that point, with my stepdad and my mom. She thought, well, if I got there and found him, I would run. So she told me he had passed away. So 40 some years later, 30 some years later, I find out he's alive because that private detective calls me and says, "Hey, he's looking for your mom." They never got divorced, so they were still married, and so that started the process in 2012 where I had reached out to him just to ask if he would speak to me, and he never got back to me. And it was kind of odd. I was doing a sermon on Father's Day, and I was reading a quote, and finishing strong, and a book, and that letter came out of the book, the original copy, and I felt God say, "Mail it again." And so I mailed it, and sure enough, about 3 weeks later, one of his sons called me, and asked me what I wanted, and I just said I wanted to talk to him. I felt like I needed to reach out to him, and so in May 2012, I spoke to my dad for the first time, since I was 5, and so that kind of led to a relationship. I started calling him. We talked every Sunday. Um, he was very sick. He's since passed away, but he was a double amputee, had liver replacement, kidney replacement. He was That's just from his years of alcoholism and just the thing, diabetes. And so, um, in 2018, he got very sick, and I had a brother ask me, he goes, "I don't think he knows God." And so I flew to Vegas, met with him, and asked him if he died, did he know he'd go to heaven? And he said no. He said no. So we prayed for him, and he surrendered his life to Christ, which was a big thing. There was 3 of us in the room. He surrenders his life to Christ, and I wanted to baptize him. And he goes, "No, I want to wait. I want to wait till all my family gets here." Well, 2 weeks later, he's back in the hospital, and they were saying the diagnosis wasn't good. So I jumped on a plane, flew back to Vegas, and we baptized him in his hospital room. I used a foam cup for my the water that I used to sprinkle over his head, but
Love it.
he was baptized there with his
Yeah.
family. We zoomed in some of his other kids, and it was a tremendous time to be with him. From then on, I developed a good relationship with him. Um, and I was never told by a father that he loved me, except my godly father, and he told me that he loved me. He used the Spanish word mijo. He said, "I love you, mijo," and that was just tremendous to feel that God would give me the opportunity to have my real father tell me, my earthly father, tell me he loved me. And then I was with him the day he stepped into heaven. I mean, I was with him in the bedroom. He was in hospice. Um, it was kind of a weird experience. We'd been there with him almost every night. We decided to go home the night before and get a good night's rest. We went to the hospital. You could tell his breathing was very short. And I laid my hand on his chest and I said, Father, please accept him to heaven. 5 seconds, he passed away and he stepped into heaven. So I was there for him when he gave his life to Christ and when he stepped into heaven. So it was just a tremendous, I feel God graced me with that opportunity.
Yeah.
I don't know if many people would get that opportunity. I know that I have another brother that, he said that, he would never have anything to do with him. But I think for me, that was something God just wanted to show you, Ron. He goes, I love you, but I want to let you know that your earthly father loved you too. So it's tremendous. It was tremendous to be able to go through something like that. So
Such a powerful moment of God bringing restoration and healing. It didn't nullify all the pain and everything you'd walked through, but it sure gave you a sense of purpose and a sense of God's, being able seeing you and using you in His life. And I know that had to be extremely powerful. And then to be able to be there as He steps into that next part of our life, and knowing that He's going to spend eternity with the Father. And what an amazing picture of God's redemption.
yeah,
Ron, when you think about redemption, what comes to your mind?
I when I just the healing, the grace, um, uh, just the where you talked earlier about surrendering. I think just this whole total out of a surrender and being given a new life. Um, to know that this world is broken and there's bad things that are going to happen. And I know that people always pray. I was reading the Bible this morning. And I was reading Matthew, and he was talking about, it goes, if you pray, I'll give it to you. That doesn't mean you're going to get everything you want. It means it's in God's will, right? And I think that just redemption, knowing that I'll see my Father in heaven again. I will see Him someday because He gave His life to Christ, and uh, that's what redemption is to me. Is that I am one in Christ. I'm a follower of Christ, but I also am going to be in eternity. And I'm going to be with the ones that I love in eternity, because what I've been focused on is to making sure I'm dragging everybody with me that I can, especially my family. There's a story about my kids that they didn't know Christ, and now they're in love and followers of Christ. And so uh, God has redeemed me. God saved me. I mean, if you want to say I was a wretch and I was going to hell, yeah, I was heading that way. And I didn't, like I said, I didn't know any other way. And when He opened my eyes, when I was at 43 and I stood up in that church when the pastor said, "Does anyone want to give their life to Christ? Close your eyes," and with heads down, he goes, "Stand up." And when I stood up, I was so embarrassed, I was so scared and shaking. But I stood up. My wife didn't even know I was going to stand up, and I stood up out of that chair. And then he said, "Open your eyes." And there was like 20 other people in the room that had stood up. And so we're not alone. We're not alone.
Not
We may
alone.
feel alone, but God's power has been tremendous for me. I think that if I could give just these guys that are listening, you talked about pride, and I think that there's a breaking process we all go through.
Yeah.
And just because you say, that day you gave your life to Christ, there's other things you have to work on giving up. And in the book, it kind of lays that out about just how God continued to break me and break me. Okay, I took this from you. Okay, I'm going to take this from you now. I took this from you. I take this. And that's the whole idea about finishing the race well, right? I mean, we want to
Yeah.
finish our race well.
Yeah, we started, Ron, talking a little bit about the power of words that were spoken over you negative, but then there were people that saw things in you later and began to really speak life over you and purpose over you. Can you talk a little bit about some of those people and those stories? Because there was
It's,
one
it's
particular
kind of
one that,
amazing. I really, as growing up, I never heard a lot of positive things like you said earlier, and even as I got into the work world, the work rewarded me on getting things done, right? And
yeah,
so there was a lot of negative things said as well as there was, once in a while you would get a positive, they say, okay, you can feel good for 30 seconds, now move on. That was the business world that I was in. But there's a pastor, and he's still just a good friend. We call each other brothers. I mean, it's beyond this idea of just a pastor, you know, I guess relationship. But I mean, for him to speak and see, he goes, Ron, you're a leader. I see the leadership in you, and then press into me and ask me to do more in God's work. Uh, when he knew I had a weight of the in the business world on me, but asked me to be involved in that piece. Uh, but to just share with me the positive things that he saw in me. I mean, my even my wife, to her love language is not to give words of affirmation. That's my love language. But for her to be able to talk through to me about how husband I am or how good a father I am and now a grandfather has really helped me. I think that my next book I'm gonna get into involved where we talk about pain cycle and peace cycle.
yeah,
And this whole idea of pain is, you get you're unwanted, you're unloved, you're not, you're abandoned, you're not cared for, you're hated, you're ugly. That drove my mind for years, right? I mean, it's just
mhm,
nobody wanted to be around me. I was not smart. I was, you know, not like I said, not loved, and it's just I got in this cycle that just spun
yeah,
until somebody explained to me how God feels about me, and that I'm a beloved, I'm adopted, I'm cared for, I'm special, I'm made in His image, and to get my mind switched from going, okay, what God feels about me, what other people, the lies that other people told me, had been tremendous. And really, one of the biggest things that I was encouraged to do is just read the Bible. And I
yeah,
think that through those pages, as you read through them, God shares that love with you. And that was the biggest affirmation to me as I started reading. When I read that I was adopted, that He was a father that would never abandon me. Uh, you know, it changed my whole focus and thought process of who I was and who I am and who I wanted to be, who I really wanted to be.
Ron. When you think about identity, it's such a it's a core belief about who we are, and we act out of those core beliefs. And one of the things is you had this some core beliefs that were not aligned with Scripture, and God realigned those, and now as a follower of Christ and someone who has taken so much steps toward healing, you are walking in that identity of who you really are as a Christ follower, and it's so important for guys. And you mentioned your pastor a pastor in your life speaking over you the truth of God's word, and I think that's one of the greatest gifts that we can give other people in our life, our kids, other, especially our male friends. A lot of times, as guys, we're the least likely to give each other a compliment. We're gonna kind of give each other a jab, give each other a hard time, and all that's great and fun and joking. But we, as Christ followers, should be the ones speaking life into our brothers in Christ as well, identifying the things that we see and reminding them of who they are. Because I think so often we again act out of these false beliefs about ourselves. And as believers, if we're aligned and our arms are locked with other Christ followers, we get the opportunity to go, "Hey, man, you said I'm a failure. I want to remind you, you're not a failure. You know, in Christ, you're more than a conqueror." That if we do that for each other, there is so much power, and especially hearing that from guys that we respect and that we look up to.
Yeah, I there was a big piece of me of, and in the book it talks about where I got involved in a small group. Now there was men and women, but I did gravitate to the men a little bit more, just because I didn't know what a godly man was supposed to look like, or what he was supposed to, how he's supposed to live their life. And I did get that affirmation from that group, and that kind of bred up into a mentorship where I had one person just that would mentor me, and his name was David, um, and I've tried to pay that back to do with men the same way, is because I think it's important. I was talking to a gentleman a couple of years ago, and he goes, "Ron," he goes, I play golf. He goes, "I don't know why, but on the golf course, I guess you use bad language all the time." And he goes, "I'm really struggling with this because I just gave my life to Christ, and I don't want to be that way. I don't want to talk that way." I said, "Well, you can do two things. One, you could go there and you be the example and share with them uh, what you've your life with Christ, or you separate." And I guess there's two ways that you could look at doing that. And I said, I said, try just going out and being the man you want to be, the Christian you want to be. And it's kind of amazing. He came back and said, "Yeah, there's two other guys now that are going to church." So I think the power in how we react to things, and who we kind of lean into, can make a difference. I mean, can really make a difference. And so uh, there's been a I don't say a lot, but there's been a few people that really, especially guys, have really impacted my life over the last, you know, I'm 62 now, so I gave my life at 43. So the last 20 some plus years. So
Yeah, we it is a innate need in us to know that we're loved and accepted, and we need that from our heavenly Father most importantly, but we also need it from our community around us. And when we get plugged into healthy small groups, we find that encouragement, and that reminder of who we are. And I think it's so important for us as men to hear that truth spoken over our lives, to identify those lies, to replace it with the truth of God's word. And we need brothers to pray over us, to help us, really take steps, because oftentimes it might be like someone's language that takes some time, that it's a journey, but that accountability and that encouragement that somebody sees that there's change makes a difference in us following through and continue to pursue all that God has for us. And I'm so thankful for the men that God's placed in my life. And that is why we have groups and online groups meeting all the time. If you're not plugged into a group, check out our website, find a local church, get somewhere to get plugged into community. There's no excuse in today's time not to have relationships with other believers because of technology and all that's there at your fingertips. So get plugged in, as Ron mentioned, the small groups that made a difference in his life. Shifting a little bit, you were quite successful in your career.
yes, sir.
I would love for you to just talk a little bit about your journey with Walmart, and now as a Chick-fil-A operator, and what God has done, and even serving as an associate pastor, and the doors that open because of your hard work. Although some of that unhealthy to cover up that need for approval and achievement, but at the same time, God has used that to open so many doors for you. So talk a little bit about what opportunities God opened for you.
Yeah. So I was, right out of college, and I just happened to walk into the right Walmart at the right time. It was over in South Carolina. They had just bought a company called Big K. I'm sure some of the older people may know what I'm talking about, but they were converting it over to a Walmart, and I was going in there for just a summer job, and was introduced to the head of personnel at that time. There was only two of them, and so the company was that small still at Walmart. And uh, so he talked to me, and he said, I had a couple of choices. I could have went into the military, active military, and so I chose Walmart. And so I worked for Walmart for about 28 years. Kind of walked through the ranks, became an assistant manager, store manager, a district manager. I guess at go backwards a little bit. When I was a store manager, I actually met Sam Walton a couple of times. And one of the biggest things, you talk about affirmation or speaking positive words over you. He was with me, so I'm there at this point. The richest man in the world. He's in my truck, right, and we're driving down the road. And he goes, Ron, what do you want to do? I said, I just want to keep growing. He goes, I'm telling you right now, you can do anything you want to in this company. You can be anybody you want to in this company. So when the richest man, the CEO at the time, the chairman we called him, would tell me I could achieve results, then I believed him, and I continued to grow. I became a district manager. I became a regional manager. Then I became a vice president of operations with the company. So I ran, you know, my area was 150 stores, about 10 billion in sales annually, and so 30,000 employees. We called them associates. It was a great career. It gave me all kind of leadership experience that I would have never gotten anywhere else. I worked with some of the greatest leaders and individuals and strategy planners and organizers and different things that helped me grow. But again, I was stuck on performance, right? So I was that put me into a place where I thrived because they rewarded the best, and so that's really helped me to the piece. Now, be honest with you, at the end, it became very challenging, especially after I gave my life to Christ. That's in the book, and so it became very difficult to navigate. I remember writing two things in my journal. I started journaling in 2004, uh, and I journaled two entries. I put first one was save my marriage, and the second one was find me a different career. God saved my marriage and did find me a different career. I really didn't want him to find me a different career. I was really lying, I think, or just joking. But he answered both, and I knew it was for the best because if the way I was working at Walmart, and again, I mean, I think there's ways as a leader, and I'm not telling performance is not bad, and I'm not saying working is not, good, but I think you have to balance it, and I didn't understand how to balance it. So I was losing my marriage. I was losing my marriage because I was gone all the time. I was working, 100 hours a week, not that Walmart told me to do it. That's just what I thought I should do. And so there was a period of time for about a year that I didn't know exactly what I was going to do. And a gentleman, he gave me Truett Cathy's book, Eat More Chicken, which is Chick-fil-A, if everybody doesn't know who that is. And I said, you can bring God to work with you here.
Yeah.
You don't have to pretend but you could go talk about God if you want to. You can be in the middle of a restaurant and talk about God. And that just really excited me about, hey, this could be for me. And so in 2010, I applied. Well, I left Walmart in 2011. I applied in 2011. In 2012, I was awarded a franchise for Chick-fil-A. And so for the last 13 years, I've been running a Chick-fil-A restaurant, which has been tremendous. It gave me the time to be an associate pastor because I didn't have to work 100 hours a week. Now I could work 40 hours at the restaurant and 40 hours as associate pastor. So my wife said, you just added the time back, and she was right. She was right. But uh, it, it 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 opened my eyes to just a different ability. It had me the ability to write the book. I mean, there's different things that it gave me that God had graced me with by opening up that opportunity. And so it's kind of, I think it's helped me be able to be not just focused on just God's purpose here, but also God's purpose in the retail world or the business world, or how as a young leader we look at things in our how we lead and how we prioritize and how we organize. Uh, so that's kind of helped me be a better rounded, I think, individual, godly individual. Um, some bad stories, some good stories. So
Such a crazy story. I think all that you walk through, and yet God's grace. That the title of your book is so fitting, "Unstoppable Grace," because throughout your life it was evident that God was pursuing you and continuing to set so many things in motion. Even hearing when you read in the book, and you guys have to pick up the book, but when you read in there so much of even how God began to move you away from Walmart, and
Yeah,
even the opportunity and how it unfolded with Chick-fil-A, and then how you got the location that was there convenient to where you were already located. So many things that fell in line that cannot be explained apart from God's providence and His hand in your life. And um, your ability to share that story is great, and I love because he has a verse for each chapter, and there's a lot of quotes in there. You're definitely an obvious, you can tell that, a great leader. As you think back over your life and your time in leading at Walmart, and then leading now at Chick-fil-A and as an associate pastor, what are some of those principles in leadership that are the ones that you lean on the most, or the ones that you think, man, if I were to nail down some of the leadership principles that I want to hand off to somebody else, these are the ones I'm going to focus on?
yeah. I think the biggest thing that, and I say the biggest thing, I think there's several things that I've always tried to focus on as coming from Walmart is to having a mission. I think, or a vision, if you want to say a vision or mission for yourself and for your business. I think that a lot of times we go into any kind of workload and we don't understand that piece of it, uh, and then it kind of creates the culture that you want to manifest in whatever you're doing. And I think one of the biggest challenges that I even saw in Walmart at the end is that the culture that Sam Walton developed kind of went away. It's coming back now, but I think that culture should be something that's non-movable. It's just like the words in the Bible, right? We can't choose and pick which word to follow and which word not, right? So I think culture, vision, mission of how you're going to accomplish role, and then it's really, I think, about you know getting better people around you than yourself. I think one of the things that you worry about in this pride, where I have to be the centerpiece, is that I want people that know more about the jobs and the business than I do. And I want to surround myself with those type of people because I know that we'll help each other. Will help each other excel. I think development of keeping developing yourself and developing others is so important. I don't read as much as I used to. I used to read a how-to book. Once a month, every 2 months, I'd be reading some kind of how-to book. I try to stay focused on the Bible now. I do read some autobiographies of great people, great leaders, to learn what they did and things that they did. So I would encourage you to keep learning. Don't ever stop learning. I think that's one of the biggest things as a leader is that we decide that
So
we
true.
know it all, and I think the challenge is to always keep learning. I think just being humble and understanding where you came from, and not, okay, now I'm the boss, and letting that change the way you manage and change the way you lead. One of the greatest things that I feel I can do at Chick-fil-A is I can get out and I can clean the floors. I can run food out to people, uh, and just like the team members do. And I don't separate myself at any different level. And I think the respect that you gain from setting that example and letting people know that you won't ask them to do anything that you wouldn't do, I think
So true.
is so important. And I think another piece is just your life balance. Maybe you want to call it work life balance, but really understanding what your priorities in life are. I mean, what is it? What is the center? Where are you spending your most time and energy at? And does that affect? How does that affect your other areas in your life? I mean, there's a big piece in the book about where my center was work,
Yeah.
and so I didn't spend time with my wife or kids, or I didn't go to church, or I didn't spend time with my health or any kind of ministry. And what it ended up being, I was just hollow in the middle because everything was focused on work. So how do you balance that? How do you balance? I'll give you a great example, guys. I'm great on time management. I love time management as a leadership focus. When I teach a lot of people about how do you get things accomplished, it's time management. And so I used to go out and I would plan 365 days for the year. Every January, Walmart's year went from February to January. So every January, I plan out every day of the week, every day of the week. So my assistant could go back into the office and go, Ron will be here on, November 10th. And so I had a coach come in, and she came in and she was trying to help me, get better. And she looked at my calendar. She goes, "You're proud of your calendar?" I said, "Yes, ma'am. Look at this. Look at this." So I had this 365 calendar. I had this 30-day calendar on my desk, and this is before we had iPhones. I had the day planner, right? Had it every 30 minutes was scheduled on what I was going to be doing. And she made this just life changing comment to me. She looked at my calendars and she looked at my office and she looked at all these awards and she looked at all these different things. And she asked me, "Are you married?" I said, "Well, yeah, I'm married." She goes, "Do you have kids?" I said, "Yes." She goes, "I see nothing in your office that would reflect that." She goes, "You have nothing on your calendar about planning time for your family." And that just kind of just slapped me in the face, because you can work hard, but you have to love hard. You have to be balanced. And I think that's where so many leaders make the biggest mistake, is that we all go to one side because we do want to perform. I mean, we are driven as men to provide. But I bought my family a lot of stuff, but I didn't give them what really mattered. And I would, if the guys that are listening to this that are married and have kids, man, make sure you're doing that, making sure you're raising up your children to know Christ. Get your wife, make sure she's in heaven with you. And I think that's probably one of the biggest things that I see a lot of people struggle with. So
Ron, if there's nothing else that people can take from this episode, that is it. I think there's somebody listening that has struck a chord with about their calendar, and what what if somebody else were looking at your calendar, what does it show your priorities are? And I think, for all of us, we can look at our lives and go, does our lifestyle, does the things that we prioritize and say we prioritize really show up on our calendar? Such a good principle and a good process for us to all walk through and looking at our calendars and determining where we're spending our time. You started by saying in leadership that you felt like vision and mission were extremely crucial. At your age, with all that you've accomplished and all that you've been able to be a part of, what are you looking forward to? What's some of the vision that you have for the days ahead, and how is that motivating your use of your time now?
yeah, I one thing, I am a terrible person at planning end in mind, right? So that's sometimes not really great. I mean, because you're always thinking so far ahead
Yeah.
that you're pushing yourself to the end. You're missing out on the daily life.
Yes.
I pray every morning. I got up, I prayed this morning, journal, and I said, God, just let me. And my wife and I are, we're empty nesters, right? But I pray every day that I love her like today's my last day, because I want her to know that. I really want her to know that. But the biggest pieces that I'm focused on is what is next. I think I have a lot of people talking to me at my age now is, okay, you're going to retire, right? So what are you going to go do? Sit at the lake and fish all the time? There's no way I could do that. I'm not built to do that. I'd drive my wife crazy if I was sitting at home all the time. But so my piece of thought is how can I continue to be significant? Um, the book is one way. I think that one way that I'm trying to offer is, if you go to my website, ronacosta.com, it has several categories that I'll come do talks in, or do seminars, or on marriage, on business, on addiction, on vision, on different things like that. So I do want to help people. I think my biggest piece of it is to continue to pour into others, and help them achieve balanced dream, their balanced dream. And I think that's my biggest piece. I love my grandkids. I have two granddaughters. They're both, one's 3, one's 2.5. And so I want to make sure that they know, they call me Pop Pop, that their pop up is there for them, and that I'm bringing them up to know Christ as well. And their fathers and mothers, they're sold out, so I don't have that to worry about. But uh, that's my thing. I don't I wish I could say there's a retirement date in sight. I There will be, but I will retire to something. I mean, and it's going to be leaning into people, leaning into couples. My wife and I started this marriage retreat where we just counseled 3 couples at a time that are it's a high impact, but it's to help them um, find Christ, understand God, and God's involvement, and a lot of the things that you and I are talking about are in that piece of it. So we want to continue as the golden days come, as um, we want to really contribute back. I think that's our biggest piece, is to honor God in what lane He wants us to do. One of the things that um, you hear a lot of people, especially doing ministry, is you can spin a lot of plates. You can spin a lot of plates in ministry, and you know, what is it the best thing you could do? What is the not the good thing? What is the best thing you could do? And so that's what we feel. My wife and I feel like is pouring into to marriages, especially our own kids' marriages and their families. Um, so I don't know if I gave you an answer to look at what's proverbially is next after all this piece of it. I just think to take what I've learned throughout my years and be able to share that down to others.
Ron, I have no doubt you're going to make a difference all of your days, and you are going to continue to pour into other people, whether it's leadership you're teaching, or whether it's investing in younger couples, or whether it's other guys you're focused on, or even your employees. I know that you're going to be making a difference, and for me, it's just so cool to hear your story, but spend time talking to you. It's amazing what God has done, and if I could reflect on anything or have someone that's listening think about, is just that unstoppable grace of God that pursues us, that comes after us. It says Christ died for us while we were yet sinners. And in your life, you went through so many things, and yet in each and every one of those horrible things that the enemy meant for harm, Jesus turned for his good and for your benefit, and made those things that were very difficult part of your story, part of your journey, where you're impacting other people. Ron, thank you for being faithful. Thank you for your ministry. Thank you for taking time to jump on this episode of our podcast. And if you're listening today and you realize you need to jump into a small group, reach out to us. Reach out to me through our website, or go ahead and sign up for one of our groups. If you need some one-on-one conversations, some pastoral counseling, don't hesitate to reach out as well. We're here to help you grow in your relationship with Christ, just as Ron is making a difference. We want to make a difference in your life. So thank you, Ron, for joining us today. Thank you for taking time to listen to this episode. God bless.
Thank you, guys. Have a great day.